Hi, welcome back to Carl and Rick Talk Risk, or in this case, Carl and Rick Talk to Eva. We have our first guest on the podcast, our 43rd episode, and we are delivering what we promised. So I think the first thing I want to do is, Eva, if I could turn it to you and you can tell us how you learned about the podcast, and then give an introduction of who you are so the audience knows. Eva.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Although maybe I invited myself a little bit. Thank you for having me nonetheless. Yeah, so I have seen your podcast a couple of times, and maybe I should first say that yeah, Rick and I know each other. I'll go into that a little bit. So my background, I have an engineering degree from Austria, a science degree in the United States, and then now I'm kind of in a technical role predominantly and project management role. And how Rick and I started talking to each other is I read his book, It's Not Complicated, and we both have an affinity for complexity. So we got to talk about complexity. And fortuitously, we also I started mentioning that I have what I would call a work hobby. So what a work hobby is to me is kind of like it's not your job, it's something that you're interested in, so you expose yourself a little bit to it. And on risk management. And then Rick told me, oh, I also read a book. He wrote a book about risk management too, so I went and read that as well. And so we kind of started talking, and I that's how I came across your podcast. And so
Right.
and then yeah, and then as a rookie or a person interested in risk management, I thought I have some questions. So this is how the idea came up for me to join you and ask you experienced risk managers some basic questions.
Can I ask you one thing first? Because obviously, Rick, you are also from a hard science background
Yeah.
and made the switch to risk management. Eva, you're doing the same, have done the same thing. How come? Why the shift to risk management? What interests you about it?
Do you want me to go first, or do you want Rick to go?
No,
Oh, this
we
is
know
all
Rick's
you,
answer.
Eva.
No, so
People don't want to hear from me.
I think with a science background, right, you know how much you don't know. And that's where the interest in complexity comes in like you have to think in multidimensional ways. And I think this is really important also for risk management, to understand what you don't know. And the scientists, you also have, I would say the more experienced scientists know what they don't know. That's really the most valuable thing. And that to keep being curious and to have that knowledge that you don't know. And I think that is really valuable in risk management. But I'm curious also to hear what Rick has to say to this.
You know, I think that's very interesting. And Carl's got to shut his ears because he's the one that's more formally trained as a risk manager. But if I may, Eva and I both have a background in physics. And the irony is, in physics, very quickly, once you get past the first and second year physics courses, you learn to become very humble in your knowledge set for a variety of reasons. And you learn to appreciate the beauty of the models that you have, but you also learn to appreciate the um, the very serious problems of the models. And this is what a lot of people with technical backgrounds in finance and risk just absolutely, totally miss. They think that finance and risk is a science. It's not. And so the irony is the physicists in risk tend to be the far more humble, even though physics is by far the harder, and I don't mean as in difficult, but as in objective subject than risk. And the risk people tend to think that theirs is the completely objective science, which I think is completely backwards. And I think that if you look at a lot of the leading people in risk management, and here I'm aging myself, leading people in the 90s in risk management. They didn't come from the business side of things. They actually came from the math and physics side of things. And I think that intellectual humility, and also, if I might say, that intellectual curiosity is something that is overall not at the level that should be in risk management. Obviously, there's risk managers, and Carl, you're kind of the prime example of this, who are incredibly curious and into continual learning.
Mhm.
So I don't mean this at you, but I find a lot of risk managers are trusting on their masters of risk management degrees, which is the most dangerous and the most intellectually brain dead thing that you can do. So
Mhm.
now Eva here is on a continuous learning journey. So hey, here we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did you get into risk management, Carl?
Um, I kind of, when I was choosing to go to, I graduated from under my bachelor's degree in 2008 in the US, and it wasn't a great time for jobs. So I had to go back to school. I thought about journalism, and I thought about risk management because a friend had found a program and recommended it to me. Um, and yeah, I still see a lot of similarities between these two. I love journalism. I've always been part of campus newspapers. I still write for friends' blogs and that kind of stuff. I think that's actually one thing Rick and I have in common is we enjoy good writing and editing.
I don't
And
enjoy editing.
oh, I love editing. Okay. Well, just writing then. Um, and and yeah, so I went towards risk management. I thought I had a better chance of getting a good job. I mean, yeah, honestly. And now I'm seeing 10 years, 12 years into a career, I'm seeing all that interest in journalism coming through in my career. I'm able to
Yeah.
use that more. And that is that I think that's where my intellectual curiosity comes from, is I enjoy writing, I enjoy digging into things like that. Yeah, so that's my reason.
I can somehow really see that because the best journalists really dig deep into a topic that they're not necessarily experts on, right? And as
Yes.
a risk manager, you possibly also have to dig deep into topics that you're not necessarily trained on. Would that
Yeah.
be a fair
Yeah,
summary?
definitely. Yeah, pick things up very quickly, ask the right questions. That's something we speak about on the podcast a lot. It's not about answers, it's about asking the right questions, asking better and better questions. Yeah, and also I'm a big stickler for actually um, being practical. Like, what can we do here that's feasible, sustainable, and not pie in the sky sort of thinking. So that's another sort of character trait I like to bring to my risk management role and also volunteer roles that I have. And yeah, it's a fun place to bring. Risk management is a fun place to be, and I agree with Rick. If you go in thinking all you need is a degree, and that tells you everything you need to know, you're sorely mistaken. You need to bring these other parts of your personality, interests, hobbies, um, into your career. It makes it more fulfilling.
Mhm.
Yeah. But Eva, I think you have some questions for us. As
But yeah,
yeah.
well, I think that leads already in my first question because it's a very general one. But like what, and I think you alluded to it already, but I let you expand on it. What would you say makes a good risk manager? I think that is really my first question.
Mm. I'll give it a crack at it first. I think the curiosity is the biggest thing. If you're not interested in the connections, how markets work, how people behave in markets and trade situations, and what kind of outcomes can come out of that. If you're not genuinely interested in humans and their interactions, I think you won't be the best risk manager. So some genuine curiosity is essential. Um, And I think that also comes through in working well across teams. The risk managers, in my experience at least, tend to be very insular. They do their thing. They focus on their model. They tweak it until they think it's just right. And I don't think those are the best risk managers. The ones that can talk with a trader and then go back and talk with the guy in finance and then go talk with somebody in marketing and incorporate this information into some kind of solution. They do a lot better. So yeah, somebody who gets out there a little bit, sells themselves, yeah, will do better.
Basically asks the right questions and isn't afraid to have conversations with a variety of people.
Yeah, for sure.
Sounds like. And you know, I like what you said, because that's also what that is one of the takeaways from Rick's book on when issues happen. A lot of times it comes down to people and complexities, right? If I remember that correctly. And that's what you said. You're like, you have to talk to people and you have to enjoy and understand human behavior, maybe, if I heard you correctly. Or put words in your mouth. Let me put words in your mouth.
Yeah, no, and I think I picked that up from Rick, to be honest. I mean, he writes a lot about this psychology and sociology in his articles. So I think I did pick that up from him, but I totally agree with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple things. The communication is key. Again, Carl mentioned my constantly going on about not only the psychology of risk, but also the sociology of risk. But this comes down to two other things. One is common sense. And common sense is not in the mathematics. Secondly is the ability to zoom in and zoom out for the big picture. Being able to connect the dots, not only going backwards and forwards in a Steve Jobs kind of way, but also connecting the dots from the micro issues to the macro issues. Yeah. And these are, those are skills that you can't pick up in a textbook. They're skills that you can only pick up by trying lots of things, making lots of mistakes, adapting after mistakes, adapting after successes. Ironically, it's all the small, what we consider the soft skills. The hard skills, the math, the stochastic calculus, the probability, etc. Those are the table stakes. It's the soft skills that make you a risk. It's hard skills that are table stakes. It's the soft skills that make you a risk manager. Yeah. By the way, what I said is very much do as I say, not as I do, because those who know me will know that my soft skills, particularly communication, are with people are not always the best. I'm the most likely in a room to tell someone else that they're an effing idiot, go drop dead. So,
but knowing what you're good at and what you're not good at is also a sign of experience. And
well, the book of what I'm good at is very, 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 very tiny, and the book of what I'm not good at is, that's an entire library's full.
Yeah, but basically I like that. So what you're saying is, as a good risk manager, you have to be able to get into detail, but then you also have to be able to take the helicopter view, and you have to move between the two. That's basically what I heard you say. Yeah. By the way, I practice my active listening skills.
Yes. Very good.
Thank you for being my buddies on my journey of learning. But that's hard to do, right? To be able to go into detail. I mean, like a lot of people who are in strategy like the big picture. People who are more in tactics, they like the detail. But going in between both is actually a hard thing to do. You really have to remind yourself to come out of the detail and get back into the big picture mode. Yeah.
So what's next?
Yeah.
What's your next question?
Yeah, my next question. So, Carl, you alluded to the fact that risk management is typically housed in finance. I get the impression, at least. But of course, companies have all kinds of risks, right? And a lot of them come from the operational side and their kind of expertise. And then there's business risks, strategy risks, finance risks. But I find that, and then I think there's also requirements on risk management for the strategic and the annual reports, right? And what I'm wondering about is, how do you incorporate all this? And how do you, and you set it up a little bit already, you have to have that curiosity, right? Because if you have a finance background, but you work in a company that, you know, has an operational component that is something else, then that also, I think, has to show up in your risk register, right? Like, how do you then make sure that in your enterprise risk management or corporate risk management that you encompasses all those risks?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think you just the vanilla answer is, you know, better and better frameworks, better and better enterprise risk management frameworks that, and I've worked mostly in financial risks, but I did spend a good portion of time when I was living in Canada working in an enterprise risk management team, and you're really communicating stuff, right? The technical risk managers are delivering figures and facts to you, and you are translating those into big picture stories for senior management and the regulator, right? Which is a lot of fun, actually. Um, but you can only get so good at that because it's quite complicated and things change all the time. Strategies need to adjust. So you shouldn't rely on your framework. And again, I'm getting this from Rick, who just wrote, what was it, last quarter for Premier Intelligent Risk? The capstone article was Risk Frameworks Are Evil. That
I was
was
going to say, you totally ignored that by saying that frameworks were the key for, doing this. But anyhow, go on.
no. I started with that's the vanilla answer, and I said like, okay, you can do this. This is the standard thinking. However, I think the better approach is more focused on risk culture. So, you're not all trying to fit into the sausage maker and make yourself, this has got to work. Risk culture is more malleable. It's more flexible. People are they have some instincts about risk. They can identify certain risks. They can also see upside opportunities. Again, I'm stealing shamelessly from Rick here because he talks a lot about the two-sided nature of risk, that there is upside as well. So I really think if you want to integrate all these risks and understand, and really get it into the water of the company, you need to focus on risk culture and making sure people have certain instincts for this, and not putting it in black and white policies and frameworks, because there's a limited upside to that.
Yeah.
I want to jump here just add a couple more things. You start off by making a statement, which is true, that risk is often housed within the finance function, as it is, of course, within academia. And I think this actually goes back to our previous discussion on your first question. It comes down to what can be measured gets managed.
Yeah.
And, the operational risks, a lot of them cannot be measured. The reputational risk cannot be measured in the traditional forms. And the risks that we can measure, and I should tell our audience that we had a little pre-discussion about your new MBA studies and your accounting course on risk management. It's the accounting/financial risks that can be measured. But here's the thing is, for the large part, they are complicated, not complex. And so if you're looking at a future in risk management, a lot of that is going to go the way of expert systems, AI, big data, yada, yada, yada. The really important risks are almost always the soft risk, the strategic risk, the reputational risk, the operational risk, the marketing risks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But because we have such glorious degrees, academic credentials, because we have, wonderful algorithms and frameworks that we can, that the financial / hard / measurable risks fit into, that's what we focus on. And in reality, the other thing that a risk manager needs is humility. Is you got to be able to say, I don't know. Or one of my favorite books is the book Getting to Maybe. You got to be able to say, well, maybe it's the answer. And that is not what we want in today's society. We expect / demand answers to an arbitrary number of significant figures of quantifiable certainty, which is the antithesis of what risk management should be, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
Yeah, because we've dug into this before, right? You've got regulation that's there to prevent the next crisis. To prove that you're abiding by that regulation, you set up frameworks, because then you can say, hey, regulator, here's what we're doing.
Yeah.
But then everybody starts to rely on the frameworks, thinking, oh my goodness, look at what we've done. This is perfect. I can sit back. And that's the opposite of a risk-aware culture that's really living and breathing this stuff.
But one final thing I want to put in on this, because I know you got other questions, so get to those. But this actually happened at my university, and I'm not trying to bash the people or the person who said it, although they were all thinking it. But when we were implementing an enterprise risk management course, again, it was within the finance era group. I'm a finance prof. One of the people spoke up and said, well, why is this even a course talking about the enterprise risk management stuff, not the financial risk stuff? He said, why is this even a course? Because it's nothing but blah, blah, blah. And I understand why people say that, but I also want to whack them in the head, not to hurt them, but to wake them up. That the most important questions in risk management are those that we cannot, at least a priori, quantify.
Yeah. And going back to what Carl said in the beginning, the vanilla answer, right, with frameworks or also processes, we like those as well. And making a pitch for also Rick's books, right? I mean, processes and frameworks work really well for complicated problems. And this is more like I'm making a statement and let you correct me or expand on it. And a lot risk management to me seems complex, which is society, human behavior, politics, markets. A lot of these are complex issues, right? So if you start to rely too heavily on your framework, then you may actually end up missing things. And the thing, you found a framework for a complex problem that works once or for a while, but then all of a sudden you're missing things, right? And you have to go back and change the framework. So, I mean, this is kind of what I took away from Rick's book. Maybe you want to expand on that.
No, actually, I think you said it beautifully. The only thing I would add is the sad part is only 0.1% understand when you used complicated and complex, what you meant by that in your description, which was bang on. But we'll leave it to those to Google systems theory and the difference between complicated and complex.
I'm going to follow Carl and also say you've taught me well.
Yeah, well, we have to put a proviso on that. Don't go to a consultant's website because they have their own definitions that do not match with adaptive complexity science. So, but yes, you said it very well.
Well, I feel like you ruined me, Rick, because now when people use complex and complicated interchangeable, then I was like, this is not the same thing. So I feel I'm ruined for life on this one.
No, you're improved for life. You're on a different plane.
I'm improved. Yeah, that's a better way to say it.
It's like those who, and here I'm going to drop a reference that I suspect neither of you know, but it's like when you're in a conversation and someone says, "Who is John Galt?" 20 people in the conversation, 19 will go, "Huh?" And one person go, yeah, I get that reference. Anyhow,
I have a guess, but I don't want to reveal now my ignorance. Is that an Ayn Rand reference?
yeah,
There you go.
there you go. And Carl's totally out because Carl
What?
reads too much, nonfiction stuff to recognize that reference. And again, being a young whippersnapper, Carl doesn't recognize books from the 70s. So anyhow,
But I mean, it's a big book in the US, right? You lived in the US and you hear a lot about Ayn Rand there. So at some point I picked it up and read it. Which one was it? It was the
Atlas Shrugged.
Yeah, Atlas Shrugged. It was the other one was
The Fountainhead.
Yeah, the Fountainhead. That's right. Yeah, but that was from Atlas Shrugged, indeed.
By the way, We the Living is probably your best book for those who don't have time to read either Atlas Shrugged or Fountainhead. But now we are way off track.
Yeah,
wow,
for real.
What?
Right. Back to risk management.
What a cosmopolitan podcast this is.
Actually, I don't think we're that off track because I mean I think that's one of the ways you can become a better risk manager is fiction. It's wonderfully creative. It's wonderfully complex, and
on that, when I have a student rush into my office saying that they want to become a finance capital markets guru or risk guru or whatever, what course should they take? I always tell them Shakespeare, because Shakespeare was, in my opinion, one of the best trainings for being a risk manager in terms of understanding uncertainty, in terms of understanding the psychology of risk, and in terms of understanding the sociology of risk, in terms of understanding the importance of culture that you brought up, and just how things don't turn out the way that we plan, and the dangers of relying on frameworks. Anyhow.
Yeah. And I agree. I did read some research also on that fiction also makes you a better person. I mean, generalized, but basically because it teaches you creativity and empathy and compassion, right? And it trains your imagination. And also, so, I mean, that's also good for risk management to imagine all the things that can go right and wrong.
Yeah. Well, it's the ultimate simulation, right? You get to live somebody else's life. That's how I think about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Step into somebody else's shoes and live there, walk in their shoes for a while.
Exactly. That's what people mean when they say, I literally forgot I was reading. Like they're in this other person's life. So
they're in flow.
Yeah.
So Carl, for our next podcast, you have to read Atlas Shrugged.
Well, it is on my list because you put it there, but I have not got to it. So at some point, we'll have you back on, Eva, once I read it.
And also then, but the only thing you had to know is when Rick makes the reference of who is John Galt, you just have to know it's Ayn Rand. That's all.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure I agree with that.
All right, moving on.
Well, I know we're getting a little short on time. Eva, do you have any final questions that are burning on your mind?
I have one more if we have time.
Okay.
So, and this is a rhetorical question, but I'm going to ask it anyways, and you will know in a minute why. What is the right number of risks? And maybe I'll give you some background, right? If you have too many risks, then all of a sudden all you do is risk management and you're no longer actually running your business, right? If you have too few risks, you're missing things. And so obviously there is no right number of risk, but maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because that is something that I feel like I want to hear some expertise on.
That's a good one. I'll try first and then Rick can improve on it. It's a good way of framing the question. I really like that because, then you have to think, okay, what's my threshold? What units is it in? What business am I in that lends itself well to, certain criteria? And you're right. You have to be practical at the end of the day, because if you try to spread yourself too thin, you do a crap job over everything, right? Or, if you just focus on one thing, you're missing a ton of other things. And as things change, you'll lose out. So that's too rigid. I mean, ultimately, it's not even about a number. It's about how do you flexibly adjust between, okay, we're looking at these risks, we're scanning for others. Okay, now we need to focus here instead. The world has changed around us as it is. Um, how can we quickly shift our focus and still keep some awareness of what we were looking at, because we could go back to those circumstances, and also, now what are we missing? Is there something else out there? So, to me, it's back to curiosity, flexibility, and the ability to shift focus very quickly, and get good at saying no as well. We're not focusing on this. This is not a priority right now. This is how we keep some awareness of these issues without jumping too far into them. Very difficult thing to do when you're in a role full time and you're given your marching orders. Very difficult thing to get management buy-in into. So good question.
So curiosity to not miss anything, adaptability to not load yourself up on too many, if I hear you right, or flexibility, you said? You used the word flexibility.
Not curiosity to not miss out on anything, curiosity to keep looking.
Okay. And also prioritization, to the ability to say no on we're not focusing on something because it's not a priority right now.
At any point in time, you've got your handful or so, you need to prioritize amongst them. If everything's a risk, nothing's a risk, right?
Yeah. So, if you have more than 3 priorities, you have none. Isn't there a quote like that? Yeah.
That's it.
So I'm going to take a slightly different cut at it. First off, I love the question. Carl's in an organization. I'm kind of a freelancing consultant / academic now, albeit, I spent my time in organizations as well. I think that the question has a personal answer and it has an organizational answer. Okay? And both of them come down to your risk esteem or risk self-esteem, if you will. Okay? I like the way that Carl started off, because my first thought was, well, first off, separate things into your risk tolerance and your risk appetite. Now, I'm going to define those because I realize that everyone defines those two terms differently. The risk tolerance are the downside risks that you absolutely positively will not take. And I always use the example, I will not do anything that within any measurable way threatens permanent harm to my kids. Whereas appetite is how much uncertainty you're willing to take on. So I will not let my kids have zero tolerance for hard drugs, but I let my kids play rugby and celebrate them playing rugby. So in rugby, you are almost certain to be injured, but the probability of a serious injury is exceedingly low. Okay? And I believe that you just focus on the risk tolerance in terms of the number of risks, and you let your risk self-esteem say, in other words, trust in your intelligence, trust in your awareness, trust in your flexibility, trust in your VUCA abilities, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity abilities, sensing abilities, and your ability to react. And you'll go crazy or you'll do nothing, which, by the way, is a known massive downside risk, doing nothing. And ultimately, it's continuous learning and trusting your risk self-esteem. Now, Now, having said that, that's relatively difficult to do on a personal level. Okay, it's damn near impossible on an organizational level, because first off, everyone has a different risk tolerance and everyone has vastly different risk appetites in an organization. And so this is where the best that you do is you kind of use from one physicist to another, use a statistical mechanics analogy, is you rely upon the law of large numbers, which is your culture. Where does your culture fit?
Yeah.
Or your risk culture, and also your more traditional use of the word culture. Where does it fit on those two dynamics?
Yeah.
Love the question. Love the question.
Well, that's really helpful, right? But yeah, it's just thanks for the answers. That was quite useful.
Yeah.
To learn more.
It was fun.
Now I'm going to be
Really enjoyed
lying awake all night tonight, and I'm not going to get my presentation done. I have to give later today, so
Or you
I'm
use
going to be
that as
thinking about
basis
that
for your
question.
presentation.
Maybe instead of giving my presentation, I'll just give your question.
Report back to us, Rick,
Yes.
on what the thinking at night came out of.
Your question was a perfect risk koan. Is the risk equivalent of what is the sound of one hand clapping, so anyhow.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, Eva, thank you so much for coming on. This was a real pleasure to have you. We hope to have you back in the future as well. And yeah, everybody watching, please leave comments on the video, subscribe to the channel so you can keep getting this kind of fascinating conversations about risk. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks,
Cheers, everybody.
Eva. See ya. Have fun, everyone.